Steve Jobs, the man behind some of the most popular and groundbreaking gadgets of our time, passed away Wednesday. Jobs co-founded Apple Computers in the 1970s, initially running the company out of a garage. It grew to become one of the most valuable corporations in the world. Jobs was credited with bringing computer technology to the masses, first with home computers, and more recently with devices like the iPod, iPhone, and iPad. Health problems forced him to step down as CEO of Apple 6 weeks ago. Wednesday night, Apple announced his death. He was 56 years old. After hearing of Jobs' death, President Obama released a statement reading, "Steve was fond of saying that he lived every day like it was his last. Because he did, he transformed our lives, redefined entire industries, and achieved one of the rarest feats in human history. He changed the way each of us sees the world." For more on this morning, we are joined by up-to-the-minute technology consultant John Quain. Thanks for being here with us, John. We do appreciate it.
Good morning.
So, Steve Jobs, I mean, it's really hard to sum up this man, this innovator, but where will his place be in history?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, he's still passing away at a pretty young age and had accomplished a lot recently, I think, in terms of maybe seeing the tipping point of the end of the PC. You know, he actually called it that himself. Lots of us had written about it because with these other devices, computers are now into these portable devices. He sort of made that happen in the popular imagination. Everybody has a smartphone. People want iPads, and we don't need those desktop computers. So he's sort of at the new generation of the computing technology business, as it were. I think that's really what he's left behind at this point.
I was reading so many poignant quotes by him, and one of them says, "I want to put a ding in the universe."
Right.
You think he has?
I think he has. You know, that's difficult because things change very rapidly, and he was able to move his company forward very rapidly too when he, came back to the company. So has he made an impact? Absolutely. Things are not the same. We don't have these clunky desktop computers. He tried many times to sort of get rid of that image of the computer and technology, and so now has finally popularized it.
He had his hands in many different things. Give us an idea of some of the other things that maybe didn't get as much credit that he was fully behind.
Well, some things did get a lot of credit, but weren't successful. Like in 1984, that little Mac with the mouse and the graphical user interface, he wasn't the first person to see that. He saw that at Xerox PARC and said, what a great idea. It took 5 years or so to do that and accomplish that. But it actually wasn't this tremendous success, and it's what contributed to him being forced out of the company a couple of years later. So, we think of it as being this like iconic thing, but it didn't work out the first time.
But he was also a force behind Pixar, wasn't he?
Right.
And that was hugely successful.
Right. I mean, he made a bet. He had left. It was a devastating thing. He was a pretty young person, about 30 years old. He'd basically been kicked out of the company. He co-founded, and he had to sort of start afresh with Next as well, which was a fabulously cool computer. We all loved it, except it was way too expensive, and it was foundering too, but he stuck with it. Apple eventually turned around and said, well, we didn't do the operating system and technology we needed, and they bought Next, and he came back.
Who was Steve Jobs, the man? I mean, is this a guy that you'd want to work for, or did he just really push it to the brink in order to get the best product possible?
Well, I always struggle with two different images of him. There's sort of this messianic figure. There's this thing that we write about where he started in a garage like the cradle or the manger, came successful, movement, then he falls from power, then he rises again, comes back to the company and saves it in this tremendous, spectacular way. And there's a cult of the Mac, as it were. On the other hand, if you ever bumped into him at the wrong time or talked to people who worked for him, he was a micromanager. He was detail-oriented. He was perfectionist. He knew exactly what he wanted. And probably not the person that all of us would want to work for, but he pushed people to do better and to build the products he wanted. He rejected at least 2 versions of the first iPhone, which drove designers crazy.
Yeah, exactly. But in a way, we're all benefiting from all the different kinds of innovations and all those demands that he put on his workers. Let me ask you this, when it comes to Steve Jobs, Apple is such a huge organization these days, but let's go back to 1984, that Apple ad,
right,
the one that really represents Big Brother and how Apple was going to be so different than that. It really put the company on the map. But did Apple become what it originally stood against?
In a way, they may have approached that point now. I mean, they're so successful. For example, the music business, the iPod and the iTunes store, that basically took over at a time when the music business was falling apart. So they're the biggest music seller right now. And that, in a way, you could say, well, they certainly control that. And the whole ecosystem of the Apple products are very well tightly controlled. The way they link to each other, the way certain products and software are allowed to work on the iPad or not. So in a way, they sort of did become that. But he's always innovating and trying something different. So that's certainly true, and you can't fault him. That did happen. He was an innovator, no doubt about it.
Okay. Also, though, that being the case, can Apple, the company, truly be the same, if not better, without him?
You'll hear a lot of talk about the deep bench and a lot of smart people that work there. I doubt it personally that it can ever be the same. I mean, one of the things that Steve Jobs was able to do was to see technology at a certain point and say, now it's good enough for this. People would try other things and they didn't work out because the technology wasn't quite ready for it. And he would reject other things. Why doesn't the iPad have cursive handwriting recognition and other things like that? Because that technology is not ready for it. And he knew that and he could see that, and he was able to put those things together at the right time. The iPhone came out when there was a cellular data network and infrastructure built, and people were used to cell phones and they were ready for that kind of device. The same with the iPod, and to a degree the same with the iPad. The technology was there, it worked.
Well, on Apple's website, you can leave condolences, messages, thank yous if you want. What are you going to remember the most? And if you could leave something, what would you say?
Gosh, what I remember the most is how much of a perfectionist he was, I guess. Never really giving up any detail. No detail was too small for him to pay attention to. Very difficult bar for other people to measure up to, definitely.
Perfectionist, no doubt. All right. Well, Up to the Minute's technology consultant, John Quain, thanks so much for your insight. We do appreciate it.
Absolutely.